All right, let's dive right into this. Today, we're taking on a primary scholarly investigation of one of the most structurally radical surviving artifacts of ancient Roman theater. We're looking at Titus Maxius Plautus's Persia, or the Persian. Now, this text, estimated to have been written and performed back in the late 3rd or early 2nd century BCE, is a massive departure from standard Greco-Roman comedic conventions. What we're actually looking at here is a total masterclass in structural rebellion. Instead of just validating the typical societal hierarchies of the Roman Republic, Plautus engineers this completely uncompromising Saturnalian subversion. In the architecture of this play, the foundational pillars of Roman civic power, the wealthy citizens and patriarchal authorities, are just completely sidelined. Absolute dramatic agency, financial control, and intellectual dominance, they're handed straight to the lowest strata of Roman society, the slaves, the courtesans, and the parasites. So by rigorously analyzing the primary Latin text, we're going to decode exactly how Plautus uses sophisticated metatheater, incredibly precise legal satire, and complex character arcs to construct a world that is entirely turned upside down.
To break all of this down, we're going to follow a rigid 6-part framework for this explainer: introduction and thematic thesis, historical context, literary composition, ethical framework, dialectical progression and character arcs, and finally, enduring legacy. Let's get to it. Segment 1, Introduction and Thematic Thesis.
So the real hook of Persa is this unprecedented, complete inversion of conventional Roman civic reality, and it's baked right into the structural mechanics of the surviving Latin text. Just look at the immediate textual evidence right at the precipice of the play. If you look closely at the original Latin personae and the argumentum preserved here, you'll notice the hierarchy, or, well, actually the deliberate destruction of it. We don't start with an adolescens or a senex, the traditional freeborn male citizens who normally drive these Roman plots. Nope, the list kicks off directly with toxilus service and sagaristio service. Plautus immediately and exclusively hands the central dramatic agency over to the underclass. And the argumentum pretty much outlines this whole subversive thesis right up front. Perfecto domino suis amoris toxilus, imit atgert curat, leno ut imitat manu. Basically, while his master is away, Toxilus the slave buys and frees his own lover, completely orchestrating the legal and financial destruction of the leno, the freeborn pimp Dordalis. The text unapologetically places a service in the dual role of both the mastermind and the romantic lead. It's honestly like the ancient equivalent of a punk rock rebellion against the social elite, and it's happening before the first line of dialogue is even spoken.
And this brilliantly illustrates our thesis right in the opening lines of Act 1, Scene 1. Toxilus delivers this profound, lamenting monologue that rigorously anchors the play's central dilemma. He is a romantic lead who is critically lacking property. He says, Qui amans agens ingressus est princeps in amoris vies, superave erumnus suis erumnus Herculi. He's arguing that a lover who is destitute, agens, endures labors that actually surpass those of Hercules himself. Toxilus lists off these mythological foes, the lion, the hydra, the Aetolian boar, and flat out declares he'd rather wrestle them than deal with love while lacking capital. But the supreme irony here, which becomes the engine of the entire plot, is his next admission, ita fio miser quaerendo ergento muto. He is rendered completely miserable seeking borrowed money. I mean, that's a feeling a lot of us today can probably relate to, right? By elevating a propertyless service to a Hercules of romantic suffering, Plautus is explicitly critiquing the socioeconomic barriers of his era. Toxilus is a protagonist whose intelligence way outpaces his civic status, which forces him to manufacture his own capital through sheer cunning rather than inherited wealth.
Segment 2, Historical and Cultural Context.
To really grasp the sheer magnitude of Toxilus's rebellion, we have to look at the stark dichotomy between historical Roman civic reality and the Saturnalian inversion executed within Persa. In the standard societal matrix of the late 3rd century BCE, freeborn citizens and masters held absolute legal and economic agency. Traditionally, it was the wealthy adolescents who financed romantic pursuits. Meanwhile, the leno, even though he was socially disreputable, operated as a legally protected free entrepreneur who exploited the underclass for profit. Well, Plautus systematically dismantles this entire matrix. In the text's world turned upside down, the service is the one dictating complex legal strategies. The slave acts as the financier, finding and manipulating institutional loopholes to secure massive capital. And at the exact same time, Dordalis, the freeborn leno, isn't just outsmarted, he is systematically targeted for absolute financial annihilation and social exclusion. This isn't just a lighthearted comedy, you guys. It is a highly calculated, secular critique of Roman social stratification.
It shows just how vulnerable the freeborn elites are when the underclass weaponizes the elite's own legal systems against them.
Building on that societal contrast, it's fascinating to see how Tacitus fundamentally usurps the typical adolescent's archetype. Usually, a Roman domestic comedy requires a massive transfer of wealth to resolve a romantic conflict. But because Tacitus is a service, he's legally incapable of possessing independent capital. So the plot requires a secondary layer of subversion. Enter Segaristio. When Tacitus demands the nummos succentos, 600 coins, to free Lemnis Silenus, Segaristio provides the liquidity by committing this incredibly audacious act of financial misappropriation. His master actually sent him to Eretria with funds to buy oxen, but instead, Segaristio diverts his master's capital to bankroll this underclass sting operation. The slaves are essentially short-selling their master's assets to fund their own upward mobility. It's a textual mechanic that emphasizes something crucial. The underclass in Persa doesn't operate outside the Roman economic system. Rather, they intimately understand its vulnerabilities, and they actively cannibalize the capital of the ruling class to gain autonomous agency.
Segment 3. Literary composition and style. So, Persa operates within the genre of the fabula poliata, or Roman New Comedy, which conventionally adopted lost Greek models using Greek dress and standard domestic situations. But what makes this specific text a masterwork of literary composition is how it adopts the scaffolding of the fabula poliata only to completely shatter its internal configurations. The stock characters are all there. You've got the slave, the parasite, the courtesan, the pimp, but their functions are violently reassigned. There's no moralizing father figure here, no helpless young citizen. Plautus isolates the traditional secondary characters and elevates them into the primary plot drivers. And the stylistic prose itself reflects this elevation. The slaves are suddenly using high rhetorical flourishes, complex legal jargon, and mythological references that were usually strictly reserved for the educated elite. The text fundamentally argues that genre conventions, much like societal conventions, are just arbitrary constructs completely ripe for manipulation and dismantling. And that brings us to one of the text's absolute most sophisticated literary devices, metatheater. Plautus uses this profound theatrical self-consciousness to expose identity and social status as mere artificial constructs. The text achieves absolute peak metatheatrality in Act 3, where Tacitus essentially becomes a theater director within the play itself. He literally instructs the parasite Satirio to dress his freeborn daughter in exotic Eastern garb, capum tunicum aquisonum et clametum adfertoit causiam. Tacitus is directing a play within a play, meticulously crafting the aesthetic and linguistic parameters of a fabricated Persian captive. By explicitly showing us how a freeborn Roman girl can seamlessly transform into an exotic foreign slave through just a costume change and some rehearsed dialogue, Plautus brilliantly destabilizes the essentialist Roman view of citizenship. If a citizen can successfully perform the role of a slave, the text implies, then the rigid boundaries between the free and the enslaved are really nothing more than a fragile civic performance.
Let's systematically break down these structural subversions because they are fascinating. Tacitus operates as the servus calidus, the clever slave, but he uniquely absorbs the emotional weight of the lover archetype. Satirio, the parasitus, is driven by such a pathological secular appetite that he weaponizes his own freeborn daughter, placing her in massive legal jeopardy just to secure a lifetime guarantee of luxury banquets. Lemnis Silenus, the meretrix, is not freed by some noble citizen's grace. She's freed exclusively through the mobilized capital of the underclass. And finally, Dordalis, the Lino, isn't just tricked, he is entirely obliterated by the very legal technicalities designed to protect his own class. Plautus takes every single archetype and pushes it to its absolute ideological limit, creating this incredibly dense narrative web where survival and victory depend entirely on your ability to manipulate institutional rules rather than relying on your inherent social standing. Segment 4. Ethical and Philosophical Framework. The text also constructs this razor-sharp critique of avarice through the character of Dordalis. In Act 4, Dordalis explicitly voices his awareness of strict Roman property law, stating, Nisi monsipio accipio, quid eo me opiest mercimonio, meaning, unless I receive her by formal transfer of ownership, mancipio, what use is this merchandise to me? He perfectly understands the profound legal danger of buying a war captive without standard, legally binding paperwork. And yet, his fatal ethical flaw is this overwhelming, blinding greed. The prospect of acquiring a highly valuable asset at a severely discounted price completely overrides his explicit knowledge of civic reality. Plautus is handing us a timeless lesson here. Greed isn't just a moral failing. It's a fatal cognitive vulnerability that makes the powerful incredibly easy marks. The slaves don't defeat the free entrepreneur through physical force. No, they defeat him by exploiting his own uncontrollable capitalist appetite, proving that avarice inevitably compromises the structural integrity of the ruling class. Now observe the sheer institutional irony articulated by Satorio the parasite in Act 1, Scene 2. He proudly declares his adherence to his ancestral trade of parasitism, stating, "Ni quadrupulare me volo, nic eam deset, sine meo periclo ire aliena ereptum bona." He claims he doesn't want to be a quadrupulator, a malicious informant, or professional prosecutor because it's unseemly to seize others' property without personal risk. It's just a hilarious display of mental gymnastics. But the supreme philosophical irony of the text is that Satorio is exactly the mechanism used to execute a massive, catastrophic lawsuit against Dordalis. Driven purely by his stomach, Satorio cheerfully abandons his supposed principles and manipulates the very civic apparatus of the quadrupulator to ruin the pimp. The text cynically suggests that civic morality and legal ethics are entirely flexible constructs, weaponized at will by the hungry and the marginalized to subjugate their economic superiors.
Segment 5. Dialectical progression and character arcs.
The narrative architecture of Persa actually operates on a flawless, four-stage dialectical progression. It moves all the way from absolute deprivation to absolute triumph. Acts 1 and 2 establish the thesis of financial lack, which is immediately resolved by Sagotratio's brazen acquisition of his master's capital. Then Act 3 introduces the antithesis to Roman identity through that metatheatric audition we talked about, where a freeborn Roman is transformed into foreign property. Act 4 is the synthesis and execution. It's the elaborate Persian sting operation where the trap of greed is fully sprung against the lino. Finally, Act 5 delivers the catastrophic legal ruin of Dordalis, culminating in a raucous, carnivalesque banquet. The internal logic is just relentless. Every psychological motivation, Toxolus's love, Sagotratio's loyalty, Sidorio's gluttony, and Dordalis' greed is masterfully interlocked. It drives the plot forward to secure an inescapable, crushing underclass victory over the free entrepreneur.
And we see the absolute climax of this dialectical progression in the specific mechanics of the Act 4 sting. The letter read to Dordalis fabricates a highly complex geopolitical scenario. Chrysopolan Persae shipere urban in Arabia, pleniam bonanum rerum a quanticius operum, which translates to, the Persians have captured Chrysopolis, a city in Arabia, an ancient town full of good things. The text uses pompous, highly specific fabricated geography, an Arabian city with a Greek name, literally meaning city of gold, to completely overwhelm Dordalis' critical faculties. By deploying this exotic, pseudo-historical narrative, the slaves entirely bypass the standard legal paperwork, playing directly into the Roman fascination with, and frankly ignorance of, the distant East. The vocabulary is deliberately grandiose. It's a linguistic Trojan horse designed to legitimize the sale of a freeborn Roman citizen disguised as a spoil of war. The dialectical arc of deception reaches its zenith right here, achieved entirely through the mastery of language and fabricated geopolitics.
Segment 6. Transmission and enduring legacy. You know, the preservation of Plautus's carnivalesque subversion is actually baked into the manuscript structure itself. The transmission of this physical Latin script from antiquity through medieval palimpsests and later recensions has safeguarded a truly vital piece of secular historical evidence. These folios, detailing Satorio's initial entry in Act 1 and the incredibly complex multi-character sting operation involving Sagaristio and the Virgo in Act 4, are not just literary artifacts. They're archaeological records of ancient Roman sociological critique. The meticulous copying of lines, like Satorio's complaints or the Virgo's sharp retorts, ensures that Plautus's rigorous dismantling of Roman civic hierarchies was not lost to the decay of time. This physical text stands as definitive proof of a highly advanced, deeply cynical theatrical tradition that actually dared to vocalize the intelligence and agency of the enslaved class right into the face of the Republic's elite.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative scholarly question to contemplate as we wrap up. How does Plautus's total Saturnalian inversion of societal hierarchies in Persa permanently alter the architectural DNA of Western comedy? By stripping power from the elite and embedding ultimate agency, legal mastery, and financial dominance entirely within the enslaved class, this ancient text fundamentally rewired the possibilities of dramatic narrative. It proved, once and for all, that comedy is not merely domestic entertainment. It's a powerful, secular mechanism for structural rebellion and institutional critique. And honestly, the blueprints of subversion we've analyzed today continue to echo through centuries of literature. Thanks for joining this explainer deep dive into the primary text of Persa.